So you want to use hand tools and power tools together? Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop. Today I want to talk about hand tools. Okay, I normally want to talk about hand tools, but recently I did a video on what are the basic hand tools that most people should be using when they first want to get into hand tools. And I had a lot of people say that's great, but what if you are really using a lot of power tools and you just want a few hand tools to supplement it? What would you go with then? So I want to do a video more on I'm doing mostly power tools, but I want to start to integrate hand tools. Where should I begin? What hand tools would be useful for a power tool or hybrid hand tool woodworker? Let's take a look. The first tool that any power tool user should get or make is a bench. Really, a bench, even for a power tool user, is an extremely useful tool. It's a great place to work on things, to pound on, to store. It's solid. It's not going to rack. You can also then put in an end vise or leg vise and use this to hold things in place. This is great for like routing. You can clamp your work down and route around it, not having to worry about it sliding around on a foam piece of or a carpet on the bench. Actually being able to clamp things in place. Doing your joinery work with a leg vise and having it stand up in place. A bench is just really the first hand tool you have to have. And really, for those out there who are kind of naysaying having a traditional woodworking bench, even if it's not a traditional woodworking bench and it's made out of 2x4s with a plywood top, if it has clamps or a leg vise, ways to hold work down, you're going to find that it changes your whole working style. And even for a power tool user, a bench is a great thing to start with. Now, first and foremost, before we get into any hand tools, we have to talk about sharpening, because sharpening really is the skill that is basic to using any hand tool at all. And we have to kind of dig into what do you need for that. Now, the cheapest way is to put sandpaper on glass, or in this case, flattened aluminum. This is from Worth the Effort. He actually makes these plates so you can put a strop on one side and plate on the other. And this is more intended for cleaning up your tools and keeping them sharp, but you can also do the same thing with heavier grits and actually sharpen on something of this nature. Now, this is cheap in the beginning because a sheet of paper is fairly quick and cheap, but eventually you're going to be wearing out the paper and wanting to put new ones on. And that's where it starts to get expensive. Next up, you can get into water stones and that type of thing. But usually I say, if you have the money, or save up for it and eventually get diamond plates. They're relatively flat enough for general use. And they are going to last you a lot longer than water stones or particularly sandpaper. They will, in the long run, be far cheaper than sandpaper. And if you just start, like I use here a coarse, medium, or I guess DMT calls this fine, and then extra fine. And this is like I'm guessing somewhere around 600 to a little over 1,000. I think it's 1,200 for their extra fine. And the grit for diamond plates does not equate to grit for sandpaper, so keep those separate. Don't try and label the diamond plates with their grit. They cut differently and they're different types. And then definitely a strop. A strop is just a piece of leather. Here I have a piece of horse butt that I have tapped down. Put a polishing compound, zinc oxide, chrome oxide, whatever you want, any of those with oxide on the end. That will allow you to get a really nice fine polish on it in the future. Now I'm going to be doing a video soon about actually sharpening these, but for right now you need to get yourself a good way to sharpen things. Whether that's a water stone or diamond plates, you're going to find something that works for you. Once you do, then you'll be set to move on to what tools do you need. So once you have a method of sharpening, then you can start looking at, do you want to get a jig or do you want to learn it freehand? Now, for a person doing hand tools only, freehand eventually becomes the way you just start doing it. It's just very easy to pick up a tool and sharpen it and be done with it and not having to worry about the jig. But with jigs, you can get the cheap one that has a small roller. You can get that at Harbor Freight for like $5 or $10, something like that. And those work fairly good, but they have a tendency to roll side to side. And so you have, if you're not careful, you can put a camber in the iron. This is one by Veritas. I really love it. If you have the money for it and you want to get a jig, this is fantastic. It has a straight guide on here, so when you put the when you put the tool in there, you can actually keep it against the side and make sure that the cutting edge is 90 degrees to the wheel, so that when you're rolling, you're keeping a nice flat edge on there. Also, with the put in the angle stop, makes it very easy. It's a very great jig. I use it quite a bit for some of the things, but most things I end up doing freehand. Next, let's move on to chisels. Now, here is where I'm going to start a lot of arguments. I do not say to go out and buy a good quality set of chisels. If you have the money for like a Narex, an early brand like that, great, go for it. My go-to set of chisel are these ones I bought at Aldi. They're Work Zone. They are cheap. They were like $7 for the set of 4. My secondary set is the wooden handle from Harbor Freight. Are they the best steel in the world? No. The ones I got from Aldi, the steel stays sharp a little bit longer than the ones from Harbor Freight. The only problem with them getting duller is that you have to sharpen them a little bit more often. Rather than sharpening them once every half hour, you might end up having to sharpen them once every 25 minutes. The steel is still fairly good steel. It's going to last you a while. Don't get bent out of shape if you can't afford a high quality set of chisels. The most important thing when picking a chisel is not the steel. It's not the edge. It's not the shape or having a flat edge or having a cambered edge. To me, the most important thing is the handle. Does it feel good in your hand? And I actually really like this style with the flat and round. They work great for me. Finding a handle that fits good, that feels good, I really consider to be the most important thing when picking your set of chisels. In the future, I'm probably going to be making a new handle for these and making them octagonal, slightly tapered. But for right now, these work great, and I like just buying a cheap set of chisels that will get you going. If you have a good way of sharpening them, then you don't have to worry about the steel so much. Next, let's talk about saws. Now, here is where it goes into an argument again. Do you get a Japanese saw or do you get a Western saw? Now, for most people, if you're going hybrid and you're not going to be using them that often, if you can use a Japanese saw, I think that they are a little bit easier. Number one, they tend to cut a little bit straighter and true without much effort. The reason for that being is that the leading tooth that's cutting into the wood is on the opposite side of the blade, is on the opposite side of the work. And so that you're not putting any force on the plate on the opposite side of the work from you. And what the problem is for most people with a Western saw is when they're cutting, they're overworking the saw. They're turning it, they're pushing it, they're pulling it. And because the leading tooth is on your side of the work, every little bit of movement with your hand is going to skew the cut, is going to turn it and move it side to side. Also, with having a heavier set, they tend to curve more in the saw if you're putting a little bit of force into it. And the problem with most Western saws is that people tend to overwork them and overturn them and overguide them. Whereas with a Japanese saw, you have to put a lot of force in them in order to make them turn. And so if you line them up straight, they go fairly straight and easy. And that's one of the reasons why I generally will recommend a Japanese saw for someone who's just doing hybrid. But personally, I like a Western saw. It feels good, and once you can get over that over-controlling and over-handling, they become a lot more fun, just for the way I work. Particularly with a hand plane and with the way a Western bench works, everything is on the push stroke, everything is in that same force, and you tend to learn from one tool to another. So I kind of like the Western saw, but Japanese saws are there. Next up is a marking knife. Now, one of the big differences between hand tool woodworkers and power tool woodworkers is how they mark. A power tool woodworker almost always uses a fine pencil or a fine pen, whereas a hand tool person tends to use a marking knife. This will give you a definite line. Sometimes it's a little harder to see, but once you get used to it, they become fairly obvious and fairly easy to follow. And the nice thing about it is you have a flat edge on one side, so you can run right up against a board and you can put a definite mark down into the wood. A specific indefinable line that everything on this side of the cut stays and everything on this side of the cut disappears is a very, very useful thing and extremely accurate. Once you get used to using a marking knife, you'll never go back. On to hand planes. Now, for the regular hand tool person, a block plane is not a plane that is really all that important or useful. It's great for doing chamfers and quick little work where you can work into things. But getting a decent little block plane is actually very useful for a power tool user for the very same reason. You're doing chamfers, you're rounding edges, you're just breaking the edge. You want to clean up a little spot. A block plane is great for that. A block plane is not great for doing a surface or a large edge. A block plane is good for doing the little detail things in corners, and that's where they can become very useful. Most block planes are also going to be a low angle plane, so that the bevel is up on them, and I like to find one with an adjustable mouth. It just makes it a little bit easier to get a nice clean edge. A Stanley 9.5 like this one is a great tool, and once you use a block plane for a few times, you'll find that you absolutely love pulling it up and putting a chamfer on a board. As to an actual hand plane, I would definitely suggest getting a number 5 or a low angle jack plane. And the low angle jack plane, I think if you're just going to get one hand plane, this would be the beast to get for your hybrid woodworker. Number 1, you can get a couple different irons so you can put a higher angle in here. Number 2, they generally have an adjustable mouth so you can close them up for some things. And they just tend to be a little bit easier. There's less things to mess with them. The setup on them is a little simpler. And for a person who's only using it occasionally, this is fantastic. If you're going to be doing a little bit more work and you're wanting to do more hand tool woodworking, then I generally suggest getting a bevel down plane. They give you a lot more options and what you can do with them, and they tend to allow you to specify exactly how you want to work the wood. I really like using a bevel down plane as I am more of a hand tool person, but for the hybrid or someone who just wanting to supplement their power tools, a low angle bevel up plane is a fantastic place to start. Lastly, I want to get into a few extras that if you're wanting to take your hand tool skills to the next level, even if you're a power tool user, a lot of people are the first saw they're going to want to get is a dovetail saw. A dovetail saw generally has ripping teeth, maybe a slight bit of fleam in them so that you can sever the fibers, but it's usually a very shallow panel. It's a very, very thin panel. It is a very fine woodworking tool. And whereas for dovetails and finger joints, this is a fantastic tool, for a lot of the other joinery, a dovetail saw just isn't going to fit it. And that's why I generally suggest people pick up a carcass saw or a sash saw as their main go-to back saw. It is far more versatile. You can cut joinery on one of these. You can also cross-cut most of your small material and any of your larger joints. This will actually treat you far better than a dovetail saw. Whereas a dovetail saw is great for dovetails, it kind of falls short on some other things. So don't go out and make this your first saw choice. Maybe your second or third saw is what I would suggest getting a dovetail saw. Next, I would say a spoke shave. This is one of the most enjoyable and fun tools in the shop. Once you learn how to use and set up a spoke shave, the world is your oyster. And they come in hundreds of different styles and types, and you're soon going to find yourself collecting different ones for different feels. And they are just so much fun to use. You can put cambers and chamfers on things. You can shape intricate shapes into things. You can make things that you could never touch with a router with a spoke shave. And again, clamping something in your bench, you can pull out and shape things down with a spoke shave. You're going to find reasons to use this because it is so much fun. So definitely getting a good spoke shave is another good step once you get the basics out of the way. Our hand router is a fantastic thing for a power tool user. For cleaning up the bottom of a mortise or anything of that nature, you have a groove that you cut with a router. Sometimes the router will leave those little swirl marks in the bottom. This will allow you to come in and shave off the bottom and get it nice and clean. And a router is a great little tool to have on hand for the power tool person. There's just a lot of little things that you can do with this, and it's a lot of fun. The last thing I would say for a power tool person is a cabinet scraper. Now normally I would just use a simple card scraper. I can bend it with my thumbs and go, but a cabinet scraper really takes all the guesswork out of it. Anytime you're working with figured wood and your power planer has left tear out and things like that you want to get out of the wood, the cabinet scraper is fantastic. It will come in and clean it out and leave you with a really nice surface. Also, this can eliminate a lot of the need for sanding. Anytime you're trying to get rid of those last imperfections, you just hit it with this, and even if you do want to sand it, the next thing after this is maybe a 220 grit just to buff it out. And a cabinet scraper can save you hours of sanding as well as the money and sanding material. Just a fantastic tool, and again, a lot of fun to use. There you have it. Now, I have to put a little caveat in here. Everyone is going to be a little bit different. Everyone's going to say, ooh, I would really like to use that for a power tool person, or why would you even include this in the list? I would really get rid of that. Everyone's going to have a slightly different list. This is what I would add to it, and different people are going to want different things. So try some things out. Be willing to experiment. Just don't go on one person's word. Find out what you like, and you might find that you like a completely different set of tools to accompany your power tools, or this might be what you want. So I hope you like this. It was kind of a fun idea. I will have links to most, if not all of these tools down below if you want to see that. Also, feel free to check out my website. I do have a list on there of tools that I suggest and or use, and that is often a good resource for people looking for something to buy. So I hope you like this. If you did, please hit like and go ahead and smash that subscribe button. If you want to see some behind the scenes features, you can see it right over here. I do want to say thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys are the reason why I can keep putting out 3 of these videos every week. If you'd like to find out about that, you can click right down over here. And until next time, have a wonderful day.